Working? So we'll try to be quite short because I understand that this is the last session before you and the lunch. Since the topic is big data and how it is revolutionizing retail, let me start off by giving an example. So there was one interesting case study I read where there was this store in the US and they were struggling with the footfall, and they realized that if they need to attract the customers, they need to do something different. So they realized that they have a lot of security CCTV cameras which are there, and it's actually a cost center for them, and they are used just for figuring out if there is any pilferage. Now they had a different challenge. People were not coming in, there's no question of pilferage, right? So they said that, well, can we look at that data which is getting captured and see the pattern of people who are coming in? And what they did, they generated some heat maps, and they said that my store is going to be like a storybook. It's going to be like a magazine which gets refreshed every month. You know, so even if you say subscribe to a magazine like India Today, every cover story is different, every week. So they said every week or every fortnight, I'm going to change the complete layout of my store, and I'm going to experiment which layout is more attractive to my customers. And they did that, and they were able to do that because they were able to analyze the data of people who are hanging around, how they're moving around, looking at the heat maps, looking at all that video which is which they were capturing. And this was, I thought that was a great example of looking things completely differently. They didn't have to do a lot of investment. The cameras were already there. They probably had to just look at the data in a different way and do some experimentation. So that's what we are really talking about, gentlemen and ladies in the forum today, how something as simple as this is revolutionizing the way we are doing business in retail. So I'll not take a lot of time. I'll just try to kind of throw it open to our esteemed panelists here. So the first thing which I would like to throw open, and maybe I will open the floor with Vineet, is that we talk about big data analytics. There is a lot of hype about big data analytics. Sometimes it's more hype than reality. If you can give a perspective from an industry point of view, what are the key challenges? What are the key business problems which has been faced by this industry, and where then big data analytics or analytics can actually play a big role in terms of addressing some of those challenges?
Yeah, that should take the next half an hour from me, I guess. That's a long one. Anyway, I'll just try to be quick there. As retailers, what we just discussed before this was, as retailers, most of us have matured to an extent of using data well and using analytics. So the only change now, or the big shift that we're going through right now is obviously we heard enough about the device that we all hold in our hand, and all of those other data that now constitute the big data. Typically, all the analyses are around the transactional data, so that's now past. I mean, that's given now. Most of us do enough analytics on the transactional data. The swing or the shift has to be in a big way into how you analyze the social media data, the data on the cloud, data that comes from your online presence of your customers, and so on. So that's one thing. So, but the biggest challenge continues to be, as I see, the fact that we are still not as good as we should be in capturing the right data, capturing quality data. So we continue to have that as a challenge across all retailers, I guess. And so that is one area that we have to work on. The other area which we'll all have to work on, continue to work on, is how good can we use the data that we receive from social media. And because of the millennials' behavior of looking for instant gratifications, for expecting a response the minute they post something online, if you miss that, you get to lose a lot. I mean, you can't afford to miss that in today's times. So, and also, how do you connect across channels and inference the data in such a way that you use it effectively in your offline as well as your online channels?
Great, Vineet. I think two things which came out very clearly. One was the challenge around the data itself, and the second one is not just looking at the internal data, but looking at a lot of unstructured data. So we'll explore this in that way. So if I can ask Abel your experience in terms of really managing the quality of the data in an organization, and what are the implications, what are some practical insights, what is it that, because we talk a lot about analytics around data, but if the data itself is not consistent or coherent or complete and there's a challenge with the quality, then you can only do so much on analytics. So any thoughts and experience of where you have been involved in or you have seen this challenge and the ways and means by which we have overcome these challenges?
I think Vineet touched on one of the points that quality of data, that's very important. So you have to first of all set objectives. What are you trying to get out of data analytics? And once you have the objective set, then you can decide what data you need to have. For example, quite a lot of times I've seen the merchandise hierarchy would not reflect the way a customer decision would make happen in a store or on the online. That's the first thing. The other thing is that the attributes, say for example, size 42, blue color shirt. Someone would spell it as BLU, someone would spell it as BLUE. Now for the computer, those are two different attributes. And then your inability to take that data and provide a relevant information to the person who's supposed to act on it is lost. And in big data, one big shift that we're looking, while we say big data, it reflects the term here. It is about being relevant to that customer in giving him the relevant message. Now, if I'm going on end of season sale, and if I know my customer likes a size 42 blue color shirt, and you know that it is not in your stock or in inventory, but how would you know if your master data doesn't say so? I think those are the missing gaps which happen especially in India, and I would say master data is not taken seriously within India. And people generally give that out to a data entry team who has no relevance as to what this data will be used for. And I would say that people who are going to consume the data should be responsible for master data. And if that can be solved, I think a lot of data that is relevant can be analyzed and useful actions can be taken.
Sure. Thanks, Abel. Now, we are talking about challenges on the data, and we also talked about unstructured data. So now let me just move to the other side of the audience in terms of the technology as an enabler for how we make things happen. Particularly, we saw previous presentations where people are talking about intelligence in the moment or marketing on the moment, doing a lot of campaigning for that specific customer. So I would like to invite Swami at this stage. You have had a huge amount of experience in designing solutions, particularly around how you do data-driven marketing, for example. So what are some of those insights you may want to share, where technology can play a very big role in terms of generating those insights and then making those insights actionable from an organization standpoint?
So one of the things that I see is that, while the topic is about the big data and how does it work in the current environment, I think the key point is how do you use the small data? Okay, so I think really what I see is that how do you kind of actually put it to action is really where I see a gap. So clearly the kind of examples that we see is that one is the technology today for big data. While we're talking about petabytes of data and you're talking about the ability to process that data, I think the fact that how do you kind of fuse small data with the large data, I think that's really where I think the examples need to be kind of looked at, and I think we need to kind of see some traction there. So for one of our retail clients, the way I think they are structured even within their departments are their silos, So the marketing team is not talking many times to the merchandising team, the store operations does not talk to the IT team. So clearly the consumer does not see you as departments. The consumer sees you as a retail store. So therefore, how do you really kind of, talk to each other? So for one of our clients, what we really did was we had a program which, in my opinion, the technology for big data, while we're talking about large infrastructure, we're also talking about frugal engineering. Because the technology is changing so much, you need to kind of look at frugal engineering as, as a platform. And that's really very, very critical. So here what we did was we talked to the social media team, which Vineet was talking about, and we said, if you're an apparel retailer, in reality, how many times do you walk into a retail store in a year if you're a consumer? You probably walk in twice, thrice, 4 times if you're a loyal customer, but how many times do you kind of actually converse in social media about the various designs and what you like and dislike is something that we kind of picked up as an insight for the analytics that we were doing. So what we really did was, we actually said if you purchase you get a certain amount of points. And if you share with your friends on social media, which is really where the social media data was actually connected back, we actually gave them social points and said that if you earn social points, why don't you come back and actually redeem it at the store? So I think the way you have to use big data is about actually saying, how do you fuse the small data with the big data? And you got to kind of pick up a lot of pilots and experiments so that you actually do a multiple experiments and then you kind of scale up. I think that's really what I see as an application of big data in the Indian environment.
Very interesting thoughts, and that sets me thinking why at all we are terming it as a big or a small data. We all need to do is to just look at the data and figure out what is more relevant for us. Now, picking up on that theme where we are actually talking about small data and big data, it is also important that we are not just looking at one side of the supply chain or the value chain. We have got multiple facets or points in the supply chain, right from sourcing to stocking to shipment to customer, etc. So that's where I would like to hear some thoughts from Sanjeev based on your experience of having used analytics for looking at pricing, merchandising, other aspects which are equally relevant and probably quite important, at least from an Indian context. And what are some of those experiences and examples which are there, which is going to be quite relevant for all of us in the audience?
Sure, thanks. No, absolutely right. I think we've beaten down the word omni-channel to death and we keep talking about it. I think what's the point of it? If your consumer is discovering a product on the mobile app and then going in, checking out product description online, touching it in store, converting on any of those channels, the idea of omni-channel is to hear that voice across wherever the channel is. Let's come back to the retail reality. What do you want to do with it? Are you going to make a product change in terms of design, in terms of sizing, colors, inventory masters? Are you going to take a pricing change? Are you going to push that product, specific product, back to that same customer who was looking for it? Or is it just about creating a better experience? I think experience can get the footfall, but the ultimate bottom of the conversion would only come in if you have the right product at the right price point. And I think, to your point, that's the other side of the supply chain. Using unstructured data, things that we've done for some of our apparel clients is looking at on-street fashion, looking at predictive fashion coming in from designers pushing it on ramps, social media talking about a picture going viral. What were they actually talking about? Were they talking about the design, the silhouette, the material, or was it just a celebrity chat who was wearing that? So I think that's noise cancellation and bringing it back to the hands of the merchandisers at the design stage, at the OTB stage. We're all sort of 95% of the market is non-marketplace. From an Indian market context, it's still inventory-led. And even in a marketplace context, the people who are selling on the marketplace are brands who sit on that inventory. So if you can't get that, then that's your balance sheet. So I think that's where I think the big data can not just make an efficiency change, which is from a marketing perspective, but actually a hard change to the bottom line of the retailers.
Great. So whenever we talk about analytics, one thing which comes to our mind is always Google, because the kind of volume of data which they usually store and the amount of intelligence which is used in terms of targeting. Fortunately, we have the Google Cloud Platform Technology lead, Anuja, with us. And whilst we are talking about a lot of technological advancements in this space, it doesn't really mean that they have to be very expensive, because some of these are fairly easy to scale as well. So from the sourcing perspective, from an enablement perspective, would like to hear some thoughts from Anuja in terms of what has been your experience in terms of not keeping this as a pipe dream, but making it a reality, because at the end of the day, you have to provide that infrastructure, to provide that platform, you need that CPU, that hardware, that ability for it to make it happen, and make it happen at a much cheaper cost, and make it happen quite fast. So cheap and fast are the two buzzwords right now from a technology perspective. So would be quite helpful to understand that where is that trend going, and what is it that you are seeing as a challenge or as an opportunity for the retailers out here in India?
Yep, absolutely. So I'd like to actually start this discussion with a case study, right? Which is, if you've heard of redbus.in, which is one of those earlier bus ticketing companies based out of Bangalore, right? This is one of these earlier startup companies. And they were churning and crunching a lot of data, right? So they required to have an online, intelligence of how their routes are, to understand which routes are more profitable for them. At what point is the customer not doing the transaction and backing off, right? So all this they wanted in real time, because they even wanted to change the routes in real time. So what they did was, I think they evaluated a lot of the traditional processes, that you would do for big data, right? And so Hadoop, Hive, Pig, so that's the regular that most industry norm is right now. They actually then turned to some of the products that Google had from analytics or as a service offering, which we call BigQuery, right? So what they did over here was that they did not necessarily want to invest the time and the monies on setting up their own infra for the big data that is required, right? So they basically plugged in their structured data onto the Google platform for the BigQuery, and they basically used that as an analysis engine. So what they did was they just had to write SQL-like queries to, churn through columns of data in terabytes of data, and their search was actually almost the same as what you would get when you do a Google search, right? So the idea is that, people now are moving towards data-driven decision making. They do not necessarily want to spend a lot of time and effort in doing the infra. They want to use something ready-made, and this is where we are seeing the trend that people want to use services, managed services offered by different vendors, which they can just plug in the data, use it, and then move out. So the idea is, more of cloud. And the trend now is that you have so many APIs and hooks into on-premise legacy systems as well. So you're not really tied to using everything onto the cloud. You can actually have a mix of a hybrid where you have your data which you think is sensitive data could be on-premise, but you're using the processing power in the cloud which is given by vendors such as Google.
So that reminds me, I was talking to one of my friends and we were going in an airport, and suddenly he saw there an alert come to him that your flight has been delayed for today. And he was very surprised because he didn't know how Google would know this information, and he was very scared. And then he realized that he had made a booking through a website, and then that data was stored in his Google Cloud, and he would have given the permissions for somebody to mine the data, and that's how he was able to get that information. So it's a great power. At the same time, it could be actually quite scary for the end consumer as well. So we just want to keep that thought as well. Now, one of the things is that since the topic is revolutionizing retail, no revolution can happen without action, because we are talking about analytics, and analytics is all about doing the analysis. But then what we also realize is if you leave it to the analysis stage and don't action it, then that analysis is of no use to us. So we would like to hear from the perspective of the industry, and that's where it will be very helpful, both Vineet and Abel, if you can share your thoughts as to how industry is actioning some of the insights which is coming out from this analytics, which is actually changing and revolutionizing the way the business is being done. Any thoughts or any examples on that will be quite helpful.
I can give an example from my own company where I'm working currently. And about 2 years ago, between the goods being delivered at the door of a warehouse to getting the goods into the bins, it would take 7 days. And then someone from the management asked, now that you've taken over as a CIO, can you figure out, can we have a simple report? And then when I went back to my team and said, why can't we have a simple report says goods delivered at the door and how much time? They said, report is existing, but nobody's using. And I think that's a blatant issue that we have. Nobody owning. So you need to have an org structure which supports the data output that comes in. And if you don't have that org structure, and if you don't have the KRS set, you don't have the owner set, no matter what data you get, what analysis, no one will actually follow it. Classic example, all of us, how many of us look at the red signal and how many of us stop? We don't. That's data for you. And saying stop, don't go, it's risky for you. There is so many times analytics will throw out saying there's so much of inventory existing and you should not be buying more. There's OTB as a theory in retail for ages, but how many of them really follow? No, I feel that we will sell more. I think now is the time where there's enough data available from your sales side, from your operation side, and it's the ability to convert it into insight. One of the things we have taken up in Arvind now, that we have enough data coming, is that can we convert it into an insight, into an action? So what we're building a portal on our own, where every time the system throws up saying your inventory is excess or it's too much, then managing director or the so-called owners of the individual business units, they can actually right-click and say there's a goal for the person who's owning supply chain to bring down the inventory by 15%. Now that becomes a task for that supply chain guy. And we are hoping that by doing that insight into action and tracking that action to reality, hopefully we'll be bringing down inventory or increasing sales, whichever way you want to look at it.
Thanks. Vineet, any?
As I said, the whole lot has been done by all the retailers. And if I talk about the current role that I play and the current industry that I'm in, it's more about grocery retailing. So, and typically this retailing can't afford to have a loyalty program supporting this most of the time. So you therefore the analytics and the work that you do are all on ensuring that the stuff that the customer come for is available in the store. I was in another panel yesterday again. I was repeating the same thing then as well. So it's not just about the exciting things that you give, the gadgets and all that comes at the end of it. It's also about ensuring the basic things are in place. So analytics can help you do that as well. So ensuring that the stuff is there on the shelf and with the right variant. And like again I mentioned is that nowadays it's also back to the specialization. So in old days, I mean, you typically talk about the long tail and you want to cut the long tail. It's